If the chatbots we know and love today are just the tip of the AI iceberg, then leading through change will increasingly be the leadership imperative of the next 10 years. So, what does leadership look like when adaptation isn't a phase, but a constant? How does leadership change when we're increasingly relying on a combination of humans and machines in the workforce? Find out today in this final installment of our mini-series on change management in AI. Hi, I'm Courtney Baker, and this is AI Know-How from Knownwell, helping you reimagine your business in the AI era. As always, I'm joined by Knownwell CEO David DeWolf, Chief Product and Technology Officer Mohan Rao, and Nordlight CEO Pete Buer. We also have the second part of our interview with Scott Anthony, who shares his advice on how to handle change at its most disruptive. In a world of permanent change, resilience beats optimization. But how do you lead a team that's tired of change with honesty and humility? I sat down with David and Mohan recently to get their thoughts. David, Mohan is the final episode in our AI change management mini-series. Over the past 3 episodes, we've covered the playbook from anchoring AI to value, to earning trust, to scaling beyond the forever pilot. We've established that AI adoption requires strategy and cultural commitment. But as AI capabilities continue to accelerate, we really have to acknowledge a fundamental shift. Change never really ends. The tools, the models, the competitive landscape are now in a state of continuous evolution. And we've kind of hinted on that in the last 3 episodes as well. So adaptation is no longer a temporary phase we can manage. It is the new operating environment for every organization. So David, Mohan, as we close this series, I'd like to talk about, I don't know, do we call it the final frontier, maybe? Is that Star Trek? Is that a Star Trek reference? Did either of you watch Star Trek? I think everybody.
I have never seen Star Trek in my life, and it's one of those things that now that I've realized this, I never will, just because it's kind of fun to say.
Okay, Mohan, did you ever watch Star Trek?
I've really not been a Star Trek fan, but I know what you're talking about, but I've not watched it.
Oh my gosh, out of all the technical people on this show, I watched because we didn't have cable. It was the only thing on, like one of those weird channels late at night. And I would watch Star Trek, Deep Space Nine. Let's go. Or what was the series that had Captain Picard? Whatever that one was. Obviously I'm not a very good techie. Okay,
You're
so
apparently
Final
asking the
Frontier.
wrong people. We don't know.
I know, y'all don't even know.
I do like that.
And this is why y'all haven't read Ender's Game. So as we get into this final frontier, what does leadership look like when adaptation is permanent? And how do leaders create an organization that is built for continuous learning and recalibration? Mohan, do you want to kick us off here?
Yeah, in this new world, there are a few things that are really important. First of all, resilience beats optimization. Any organization that's been engineered for peak efficiency is going to struggle in this new world because the goal isn't perfection; it's responsiveness. It's constant change, right? That's the first point. The second is around governance enables speed. It does not slow it down. Traditionally, we've thought of governance as safety and committees and, making sure you get approvals. But in this case, governance is very, very important, but it has to enable speed and not be, speed breakers on the road. Ambiguity is not governance. Clarity is. So that's very important. The third is around design around principles, and I think David's going to love this. Design around principles and not tools, right? Super important because strong principles are going to survive the platform shifts, right? Very important to anchor your company around strong principles of how AI is going to be used. And then finally, I'll say that you have to normalize constant recalibration. constant recalibrations, underlying models change, adjustments become expected, they're not escalations. The strongest teams don't panic when things change, they just recalibrate. I mean, it's kind of just making sure you're in this dynamic world where it's volatile, things are changing, and you just take change as a feature and operate your business that way. I'm not saying this is easy. This is a difficult leadership moment, but that's what this moment asks leaders to be, that you
Hmm.
have to adapt yourself for this
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
Okay, I heard 4 words there that just kind of came out. So resilience, governance, principles, and recalibration.
Mm.
Those 4 things, if we get those right, we will be building the kind of organization that we will need to be able to succeed in this next era.
Yeah, I love that word, especially principles,
Mm,
Mohan. I think great leaders actually provide guardrails that give great autonomy and allow people to operate within. They don't give detailed descriptions of what needs to be done, right? They empower people to figure out their own how, but show them guardrails for success. And I think that is a really good one. And one of the ones that's really important in this AI world because we're still figuring it out to provide those principles, that direction, not the plan, I think is essential, for sure. Another one that really feels like it goes along with it, but is almost the inverse of not how do you give direction, but how do you receive input. It is moving to a place where we are able to do a better job of interpreting signals and acknowledge the signals that we are interpreting. I think too often leaders manage by gut and instinct without explicitly consuming. When I think of not just the signals you get from humans, but the AI signals that we now have, it's really essential that you are being deliberate about leveraging the flood of information that you have coming at you. And how do you really refine that skill of interpreting those signals and turning it into the decisions that you make, as opposed to just coming with a decision made based on your past experience and based on the data that you have readily accessible to yourself. We've got to, in this environment, really thrive off of the multitude of information that we have flowing with us. And then the last one that I think about, we actually talked about this earlier in the series, but really understanding what is uniquely human and not only empowering people, but yourself, leaning into what am I uniquely qualified to do versus what could the machine do, and really acknowledging the humanity. And I think in this sense, we're talking about judgment, right? We talked before about wisdom and prudence and how the machine can give us information, give us a calculated answer based on probabilities, but it is the human's job to apply that. I think something very similar can be said for creativity. Right? How do we go approach a market, create new strategies, the creative work? True creation from the ground up is not something a machine can do. A machine is a prediction machine based on past, right? And so if we want true creativity, true novel ideas and concepts and breakthroughs, it requires the person. And so as a leader, setting that example, taking on that judgment and that creativity for yourself, but also empowering your teams to demonstrate that and to use tools to fuel it, but not depending on the AI for the creation or for the judgment, depending on the human for that.
David, question for you. As what I'm getting is it's leadership almost becomes sense making, right?
Mm,
So that as things are changing, you're essentially for the company, you're creating a sense of what's going on. How do you think leadership should change? Is it just about vulnerability, or what is it about leadership that's different from the past era?
yeah. Well, it's a great question because I do think when you look at what leadership actually is, right? Leadership is the art, right? It's the craft of motivating and inspiring others towards an intended outcome, right? So in this world, what has changed is not that craft is still a very human thing, right? To resonate with somebody's heart and to help move them forward, right? To articulate an idea and provide clarity around that idea so people can move towards it, right? Those types of things, to bring people together and to find common ground. All of those things are still part of the craft of leadership. What has changed is now we have different tools to be able to do that. And the biggest area that I think that we have is actually that this AI can understand human language, and human language provides us infinitely more data than we've ever had before. And so leveraging AI as a leader to fuel your decision making, to fuel the clarity that you provide, to fuel the creativity that you use to pull on heartstrings, right? Those types of things. To me, AI is just a tool. It doesn't change the craft of leadership. Leadership is still something that's very, very human, but it does give you access to more tools that can help you do it more effectively, more efficiently, and allow you to specialize in that craft itself versus the analysis or the creation that you need to do manually yourself.
Well, and it seems like with everything we've laid out here through this entire series, I mean, in many ways, you're going to need that because you are going to need to lead at another level than you ever have before.
Totally.
Yeah, you almost have to build an organization that is confident for this constant adaptation, right? So that is a different skill, it seems to me, Courtney.
It's very interesting. All right, David, Mohan, we've made it through 4 episodes on change management, which I know I've said this before. I'm saying it again to everybody listening. This really is the key to success with AI. And so, David, Mohan, any final thoughts as we close out this series?
My big takeaway, Courtney, is that there is not only change management to do, but that this change management is all about leadership, and leadership itself is
Mm,
human,
yeah.
right? And so here's an example. We've been walking through talking about these things. The number of times we tripped over what is uniquely human, and we reminded ourselves that, yeah, there's a lot of a CEO's job that can be replaced by AI, but to lead, to motivate and inspire people towards an outcome is still very, very, very human.
Mhm.
And so just a great reminder of how these tools are entering our lives, but how the person still matters. And actually, I think what we've been struggling with as organizations is we've been depending too much on the AI to do what is truly human. So get back to teasing those apart and leveraging the AI for AI, but doing your job. Lead, inspire, motivate, drive the change in the organization because that's your job. It's not the machines.
Yeah, I'd say a core leadership aspect that's new here, but we've talked about it before, is this vulnerability as strength, which essentially in this world means, Courtney, that leaders have to learn in public and normalize this change for everybody else. And that is not easy because leaders are trained to be I'm going to provide clarity, even if it means fifth grade clarity. I'm going to do clarity, right? But this is about learning in public that normalizes change for everybody.
So well said. And I will just add my own thoughts of wisdom to this and let you all know that you should go watch an episode of Star Trek tonight. All right, David, Mohan, thank you as always.
So fun. Thank you both.
Thanks, Courtney. Bye, David.
The new era of commercial intelligence is, well, it's already here, guys. If you want real-time, objective intelligence on the health of your commercial relationships, you might be interested in trying out Knownwell. So stop flying blind and start sprinting ahead. Go to knownwell.com/30 days, 30 days, so you can see your commercial intelligence on the Knownwell platform. We're excited to welcome Scott Anthony back to the studio for the conclusion of our series. In this episode, Scott and Pete discuss how leaders can normalize constant recalibration, treating change as a signal rather than a disruption. If you haven't listened to episode 113 for the first part of this interview, be sure to check that out as well. Probably should pause right now, go listen to that one, then come back.
Well, that's where I was going to go next. The question for leaders. A lot of leaders espouse the belief that they want decision making to be powered by AI, but I suspect they don't appreciate how decision making in that kind of environment needs to change. Based on your studies and experience, what are the first or the biggest things that have to change about how decision making happens?
Well, the way I summarize this to my students, I'm a big fan of paradoxes. So I will have these phrases that sound tautological or paradoxical or whatever. And the one here is lead by letting go. And that's really what leaders have to do, which is extremely hard because people get to leadership positions because they've made big, bold decisions and they've worked out. But, Scott Cook from Intuit, founder of Intuit on the board for a long period of time, financial software company, he put it really well pre-AI, about 15 years ago. He said, as we enter a world with more data, what leaders have to recognize is they are no longer decision makers. Experiments are decision makers. What leaders have to do is create the conditions where people can run the experiments because the experiments generate the answer. When you don't know that's the only thing you do, it's even more true today. What leaders have to do is create the conditions, give people the tools so they can go and make the best decisions themselves. And, the leader backstop if it's a really big one, they break a tie, they go and evaluate and make sure that people are doing the right things, etc. But they're not making the decisions, they're letting go and creating the conditions where the work can really go at the right pace. It's really hard. I mean, that's not a natural thing for leaders to do. But those that do it recognize that they're empowering their people, they're enabling them to make better decisions. The organization benefits from it. You have radical examples of companies that are really rethinking. Buer is an example in Germany that really are radically rethinking how organizations ought to be structured in a world of AI, but they are very firmly in the minority because of the depth of the problem.
Huh. Well, if I could tap into that vein, how do organizations come together differently when you're powering decisions and work with AI?
The way that it always starts is with leadership recognizing that change is not bad but good. So you have to have that as an entry point, that we're doing something that's going to make the organization a better place. And this is important because a lot of times when organizations start to do new things, they frame things as the things they're avoiding or some of the things that they're cutting. No one gets excited or inspired by that. You have someone who's got a vision, they've got a belief, etc., and then you go and do the work, and it's nothing more than that. The nature of the work, though, I learned this from work that I did back in first career as a consultant with DBS. The nature of the work is really getting people to understand that what they have to do is change the day-to-day habits in the organization. This is what DBS did when it became a more digitally oriented bank. It's enabled it to be really good with AI. It said, we need to make sure that the day to day habits in the organization are being agile, being customer focused, being data driven, being experimental. And we essentially reduce the friction that makes it hard for people to do that. So some of this is devolving authority so that people have more room to make decisions. A lot of it is saying, what is getting in our way and how can we remove it? As an example at DBS, they formed something called the Kiasu Committee. This is a fun example. Kiasu at DBS is based in Singapore. It's Singapore's largest bank. So Kiasu is local slang that basically means fear of missing out. DBS was suffering from all these processes that were slowing things down. So this committee was a place where you could go and sue a process and say, this process adds no value. There's no reason for us to have it. And they were empowered to say, all right, by the power vested in me, I will strike down that process. It's just a simple example. You used to have to get a physical signature on a vacation request, which, in this day and age is ridiculous. So the process was sued, the committee approved, and the process disappeared. And they said we can do things virtually now. So whatever it is, that notion of saying, what are the things that are holding us back? How do we remove the gunk from our system so that we can enable people to follow these behaviors? That's the key to really driving culture change at scale.
When we're looking at our day-to-day work, at our org structures, at our market approaches, everything we do can somehow be influenced or changed or to borrow your term, disrupted by AI. And so there has been a narrative about change accelerating as long as I've been looking at business. And, like, here it comes again, or here it comes more, or faster, or whatever. Have you discovered that there are attributes or best practices in organizations, or maybe on leadership teams, that position them best to handle change at its most disruptive, I guess?
Yeah, for sure. And the no silver bullet. It's a tough answer. It's a tough challenge. But I use a metaphor of athletic training to try and help with this. So, I decided to do something maybe a little bit crazy. I just turned 50 this year. I have been running for a few years, but not for my entire life. But I started a few years ago just for cardiovascular health and started stretching a little bit and did a 10 miler last year and a half marathon this year. I'm like, well, while I still can, let me try and do the Boston Marathon next year. So I joined a charity team and I'm doing that next year. And what do you do if you're trying to train? Well, you got to push yourself. You have to cross some kind of threshold where you are actually uncomfortable because that's the only way you develop new capacity. You can't push yourself too much. There's a tolerance limit where if you hit that tolerance limit, your body shuts down. So the trick is to find a way where you push, recover, push, recover, push, recover, and sustain that over long periods of time. So, how do I use this metaphor to talk about dealing with constant change in organizations? That threshold where you're learning, how do you make it as low as possible so that you can learn without too much strain? Well, if you've got what Amy Edmondson from Harvard would call a psychologically safe environment where people feel like they can try new things without repercussion, that helps. If you're really good at saying, what are the things I don't know? How can I get really good at learning through experiments? That lowers the threshold of learning. How do you push up your tolerance level? How do you build your capacity? Well, in athletics, it's deliberate practice. The same thing is true in organizations. The more you deliberately practice being in uncomfortable new situations, the better you are able to handle it. So, organizations that put people on rotational assignments where they're going to do geographies or working in new functions consciously have their very best people go not to bigger opportunities but smaller ones that are more entrepreneurial, where they'll face uncertainty and so on. That's things they can do to push the tolerance level up. How do you have people stay in that zone and persist? You make it fun. You don't have it something that feels like a slog. You have it be something that's like, hey, this is cool. We're doing new things. We're learning new things. You can borrow tools like gamification and so on so that people see leaderboards and they're motivated to participate. But it's not because they feel like they are forced to or have to. It's actually something they enjoy. So I think if you follow those practices that I would sum up as psychological safety, deliberate practice, and play, if you do those things, you increase your organization's capacity to deal with the never ending world of change. And you're exactly right. It is accelerating, it's not slowing down, it's getting harder. The default behavior is to stick your head in the sand, and that does not work in this day and age. It's hard.
Safety and practice and play, those are culture and leadership levers, or characteristics, more so than anything else. It's not best practice per se. It's not mechanics of work. And I guess that's an interesting takeaway for me in all of this around AI, which is so widely heralded as a disruptive technology. It's not the technology, but the culture of the organization, your ability to make hay with it, that's going to matter the most in the end.
Very well put, Pete. And it is a very persistent finding from both studying, researching, and living, whether it's as an advisor or somebody who helped build a business, or now as an academic on the front line of disruptive change, because we're trying to figure out along with everybody else. The technology is the easy part. Particularly with generative AI is super easy to use because it's natural language interface and so on. The sociology, the culture change that goes beneath it, when you have a professor say, I've been teaching this way for X decades, and now I've got to do something completely different. That's really hard. You get some who are all over it. Some of the professors I've learned the most from about AI are 2 decades older than me. So, it's not just about age, it's really about mindset.
Well, so our team has come to understand, since we met you, that you're not just a great thinker, as demonstrated in this conversation, but also a great writer. And with me, your latest publication, Epic Disruptions. I wonder, could you give us the Desk Jacket summary, what a leader listening to the podcast would need to know about why to pick the book up?
Because it's an awesome and super fun trope through history that will teach you all about disruptive change. And the three things that you will learn from it is you will learn that disruptive innovation changes the world for better and sometimes for worse. So you want to understand the downside, dark side, or shadow of disruptive innovation as well. You'll learn that disruptive innovation doesn't require superpowers. There are a set of behaviors that anyone can follow that can enable them to be a great disruptive innovator. And I've got stories about everyone from Steve Jobs, who you expect, to Julia Child and Florence Nightingale, who you might not expect. And then the final point is disruption rewards patience and persistence, which ties back to a theme we talked about before. The more you approach it with a smile, a glint, play, a little bit of fun, the easier it is to succeed with it. So a lot of great, in my view, at least, huge bias, of course, since I wrote it, a lot of great historical stories that I think have a degree of timelessness to them, but then have very timely messages for the fiercely urgent moment that we're in right now.
What I love too is that it's storytelling. So the read is both a gift from an insight perspective, but a joy from a reading perspective. Well, well done from one guy's.
Just Pete, just one sentence about this. It'll be a long sentence with comma clauses in it. But the thing that was interesting to me as a writer is this book was not my idea. It's my ninth book. And every other book, I've given a proposal to the publisher, they've approved, I've written. In this case, I proposed a different book to the publisher. They said, maybe later, we want you to do this book instead. They pitched the idea of a history book. I said, I'm not a historian, but that sounds kind of fun, so I'll give it a try. And I'm so glad that I did, because it was a joy to write, and people have generally found it to be interesting and useful, which is good.
Awesome. I'm looking at the clock and I'm recognizing we don't have a ton of time. Maybe we could dismount with one semi-fun question. You are now on my list of authors and thinkers to follow. I wonder who's on your list. Who do you follow? Who do you read?
A lot of different people. So, a name that is near the top of my list is Wendy Smith, who teaches at Delaware and writes a lot about paradoxes. I also like Howard Yu, who teaches at IMD and does a lot of work about how you have a business be future ready. There is Andrew Winston, who is one of the big thinkers out there about sustainability, just named the world's most influential management thinker by Thinkers 50. Of course, Adam Grant, because anybody who's in a world of change will be thinking about Adam Grant. And then the last one I think I will name check is Amy Webb, who is a futurist who just has very digestible thoughts about what's coming at us next. There's a lot more. That's just tip of the iceberg, but those are some of the great thinkers out there.
An awesome place to start. Speaking of awesome, this has been terrific and awesome. Scott, thank you so much for sharing your insights and spending time with us today. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise. Thank you very much, Pete.
Thanks as always for listening. Hey, this is the end of our mini series on change management. Now is a great time to send someone that would be interested all 4 episodes. We really hope that this content helps you do an incredible job leading your organizations and making AI stick. At the end of every episode, we like to ask one of our AI friends to weigh in on the topic at hand. So, hey, DeepSeek, today we're talking about leading in a state of constant change. Got any advice for us?
For sure. Focus on staying flexible and clear. Be ready to adapt your plan, but always keep your team aligned on the main goal. It's less about having all the answers and more about navigating the uncertainty together.
And now you're in the know. Thanks as always for listening or watching. We'll see you next week with more AI applications, discussions, and experts.
Hey, if you made it this far in the episode, first of all, thank you. And second, we know that AI is changing all the time, and so we've got you covered. Here is another great episode for you to watch to stay in the loop on what's happening in AI and business. And second of all, we'd love for you to subscribe. You can do that right here. I've always wanted to do that, by the way. So do that now. That would be great.